Welcome, welcome. Let us begin by opening in the reading of the Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be talking, we missed last week, and this week we are covering the parasha Vayigash. Pronounce it close enough. Or as he goes, he approached or he drew near. My mic seems to be moving around. Can you still hear me? So, in Tony Robinson's talk, he over the last couple has talked about the last four Torah portions and relating them thematically. And so he draws on the fact that all of them are related and all of them draw perspective. Does that one do better? Are you recording? Let me stop recording it. This week, as we study in the Torah portion, he really draws on the last two Torah portions as well. Unfortunately, we only covered one of those. Last week, we didn't have one. We were blessed to have Eddie here, and so he did talking, so we didn't do last week's, which was interesting just to share with you. This week, I started and got 3/4 into the Torah portion and realized I was doing last week's Torah portion because we didn't do it, and so I had to stop and move to this Torah portion. So you'll find not a lot of slides are in this one because of that. That being said, so with that, we will start off by the Portia, or the parashat, covers Genesis 44:18 to 47:27. And if you notice, it still has it has one pay in it and two shema. I went the wrong way. A samak, Remember that the pay means it's a beginning or the start of another paragraph or the end of, and it goes into another subject. And we have one in the middle of this Torah in these parshas. And in this case, we won't be talking about the parshas. Today we're going to be talking directly in just how it relates to Messiah. I was trying to think of how we could do this one because he does a lot of referring back to the others. I thought rather than going into the Portia, we would talk about the connection to the Messiah because it is really powerful stuff. But before we begin with that, here's a riddle for you. See who can figure this one out. It is not necessarily related to my wife, just so you know. But a woman shoots her husband, then holds him under water for 5 minutes. Next, she hangs him. Right after that, they enjoy a lovely dinner. Can you explain that? Yes. Have you heard that one before? Nope. You're right. She took a picture of him and developed it in her dark room. That would probably be that would probably be a case where people who know this one kind of dates them because now anymore, nobody has a dark room. In the generation before me, they probably don't even know what a dark room is because most of theirs are digital pictures. So, as again, he did not cover a parsha. We're not going to be covering the parsha this week. We're going to go into talking about the connection to Messiah. But before we do the connection of Messiah, which I did fail to mention, that these are studies done by Tony Robinson, the Restoration Torah Ministries. Most of the information that are given is given through him. However, going back to understanding the last 4 Torah portions of Genesis at the parashat level, remember we talked about the different levels 2 weeks ago, and he goes more into the thematic parashat level. Before we talk about, we're not going to cover that, we're going to cover how it goes in the Messiah, but before we talk about how it connects to our Messiah, I want to read a synopsis of the Torah portion so we can understand the connections that are being made to our Messiah. In what we would have covered last week's Torah portion, Joseph, unjustly imprisoned, finally came to an end after he interpreted Pharaoh's dream and advised him to prepare us for a 7-year coming famine. Greatly impressed by Joseph, Pharaoh immediately appointed him to be the sovereign viceroy of all of Egypt. The famine then spread throughout the region, and Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain, but kept Benjamin at home for fear for his safety. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him and accused them of being spies. When his brothers protested their innocence and gave him account to their origin, Joseph demanded that they confirm their story by bringing Benjamin to Egypt and then imprisoned Simeon as a hostage. They then returned to Canaan and Jacob finally agreed to send his youngest son, but only upon the sworn promise of Judah for his welfare. When the brothers went back to Egypt the second time, Joseph received them with a feast and released Simeon. But when they left for home the following day, Joseph sent his steward to arrest Benjamin, who had been framed for stealing a planted divination goblet. As Benjamin stood before Joseph, accused of the theft of the chalice, Judah drew near, hence the Torah portion, and offered himself in exchange for his brother, pleading with Joseph to spare his fathers the loss of yet another son. Moreover, since he personally pledged for his safe return from Egypt, Judah asked to remain in Egypt as Joseph's slave in Benjamin's place. Upon hearing Judah's plea, Joseph ordered everyone except his brother out of the room, and they wept aloud. After cleaning the room, he began speaking in Hebrew and said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" When the brothers drew back in dismay, Joseph said, "Draw near to me, please." The same verb, nagash, and repeated that he was indeed their long-lost brother whom they sold in Egypt. He confronted them in explaining that the famine was to last for 5 more years, and God had providently raised him up to preserve the family's life. Joseph then assured his brothers that it was not you who sent me here, but God. Then he urged them to return home and bring Jacob to Egypt, and where they would live in the land of Goshen, to be provided for by Joseph. Pharaoh learned of the brothers' arrival and instructions to tell them to bring Jacob and all of the members of his house to Egypt to live in the fat of the land. The king even offered wagons to assist their journey to Egypt. Joseph gave them the sets of clothing. Benjamin received 5 sets plus 300 shekels of silver. Additional provisions, 20 donkeys laden with the finest of things of Egypt as a gift of his father's Jacob. The brothers then left for the return trip to Canaan. Upon returning to Canaan, the sons of Israel told him all that had happened, whom, after seeing the gifts sent from Egypt, finally exclaimed, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die." After being assured by God in a dream that it was safe to leave the promised land, Jacob and all of his members of his house began the journey to Egypt. The portion then lists the names of the direct descendants of Jacob, not including his sons' wives, numbering 66 persons in all. Adding to Jacob himself, Joseph and his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, we have a total of 70 who began the generations that lived in Egypt. Jacob and his household arrived in Egypt, where Joseph went out to meet him upon his chariot. Israel wept when Joseph embraced him after the 22 years of separation and said, "Now I have come to die, having seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph then told his brothers to tell Pharaoh that they were shepherds, so they went to be sent to the fertile land of Goshen. The region of Goshen is located in the northeastern Egypt, in the delta of the Nile River, where it empties into the Mediterranean Sea, the Sinai Peninsula just to the east. The Torah portion ends as Joseph continues to amass a fortune, including cattle and land, for the grain held in Egypt's storehouses, which he conferred to Pharaoh. Indeed, he has set up a taxation system in which a fifth of the land's produce would become property of the state, only to the priests who were exempt from this tax. The Israelites lived in Goshen, where they acquired more property and were fruitful and multiplied in number. And that synopsis I did get from the website HebrewForChristians.com. So if you ever have a chance to visit that, he has a very good Shabbat table talk page. So the point of covering that, reading that little bit, is so we can get a recap and an understanding of the last four Torah portions of Genesis and understanding them at the messianic level. And the object of the messianic level is to learn how the Torah teaches the life and ministry of Yeshua HaMashiach, Yeshua that Moses wrote about him, which we later learn we read in the New Testament scriptures. Ever since the Torah never mentions the word Messiah, this section will help us see the connection between the Messiah and Torah. This is primarily done using the thematic analysis, as Tony always puts out, and in the Midrash. So let's begin. I'm going to read. Today is a lot of reading. And again, it's to help understand, because what we're going to do after we get done with a lot of the reading is take a hold of a lot of nuggets. So it's not going to be a case of, it's going to seem a little bit discombobulated, if I can use that word, but it's because we're just taking some nuggets of everything that's there. We don't have a lot of time to cover all that Tony covers in this parashat or this Torah portion, so we can only grab what we can. And so we're going to take a look at that. So today there is going to be a lot of reviewing before we begin to better understand. So if you turn to page 11, that's where it starts off. And what he's doing what I want to do here is I want to read from page 11 a messianic review. He's going to review all the things that he covered and connected the last two Torah portions to Messiah, and then we're going to finish off with this third Torah portion and relate it to our Messiah. In the parashats two prior, we clearly see he shows a prophetic picture of Yeshua's first advent. Tony refers to him as a first advent and his second advent, his first coming and his second. Thematically, we see allusions concerning this. A prophecy of Messiah Yeshua, the one who would have a miracle birth. A prophecy of Yeshua as the second Adam, whom we would receive life. A prophecy of Yeshua, the good shepherd. A prophecy of Yeshua, the one who is hated by his brothers. A prophecy, the son of the king. I'm just going to read the moments. I'm not going to keep saying a prophecy of Yeshua. Also, the only begotten Son of the Father, whom the Father loves with an intimate love. The one rejected by his brothers and hated without a cause. The one who was prophesied to be a future leader of his brothers. The one who was sent to check on the welfare of his brothers. The one who sought after Egypt after the father's lost sheep. That we covered two portions ago, if you remember, or most of these. The one who conspired against, the one who was handed over to the Gentiles because the brothers didn't want him to be the actual agents of his death. And then this talks about last Torah portion, which we didn't cover because we are blessed to have Eddie here. The one who was thrown into the grave or pit, the one who was not found in the pit or grave, the one who was stripped of his garments, the one who was sold for silver, the one who has a garment dipped in blood, the one who was a descendant of Perez, the son of Judah, through Tamar, the one who was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, the one, although divine, emptied himself of all the divine prerogatives and humbled himself to become a human servant, the one who would use the emblems of the bread and wine as a symbol of his death, the one who was incarcerated along with 2 other prisoners, the one who would grant eternal life to the one of the prisoners executed with him, the one who was handed over all the Gentiles to be executed, the one who would be executed by being hanged on a tree, and the one who is exalted in the right hand of the Father. We also see that Joseph's separation from his brothers teaches us that Yeshua would be separated from his brothers for a long period of time. During the time of his separation, his brothers, and after his exaltation of the viceroy of Egypt, the Gentiles knew Joseph as their savior. This brings us to the current Torah portion. And as we go through the current Torah portion, he mentions about the pit, the well, the prison as a picture of a grave. He does mention how Joseph descended and ascended from a pit. The Hebrew word is a picture of death and then life and then resurrection. He points out in this that if you look at the Hebrew word that he uses in Genesis 41:14, Genesis 37:22, 27 to 30, that prison, pit and dungeon are often prisons where often just glorified holes in the ground. In other words, when you hear the term dungeon, it is usually a pit. It's a hole in the ground, and there's a picture of what could be an illustration of a hole in the ground. So whenever you hear of a pit, it's also synonymous with death. Pay particular attention to, I do want to read this, Genesis 44:1. Let me get there, 44:1 through 10. Pay particular attention as I read to the brothers' proposal in Genesis 44:9 and Joseph's servant's reinstatement of the proposal in 44:10. And I'd like somebody to answer that, if they will, as I read it. What looks strange about these 2 verses? And that's 9 and 10. Then Joseph commanded his stewards, filled the bags with men men's bags with as much food as they can carry, to put each one's money at the top of the bag. Put my cup, the silver one, on the top of the youngest one's bag, along with his grain money. So he did as Joseph told him. At the morning light, the men were sent off with their donkeys. They had not gone very far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, pursue the men. When you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good?'" That's interesting. Anyway, isn't this the cup that my master drinks from and uses for divination? What you have done is wrong. When he overtook them, he said these words to them. They said to him, "Why does my Lord say these things? Your servants could not possibly do such a thing. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money we found at the top of our bags. How could we steal gold and silver from your master's house? If any of us is or found to have it, he must die, and we also will become my Lord's slaves." In 10, the steward replied, What you have said is right, but only the one who is found to have it, meaning the cup, will be my slave. The rest of you will be blameless. What is strange about the verses 9 and 10? Do you see the strangeness of it? The expectation is if somebody is found to have it, they must die, and the others will be slaves. Whereas in 10, it says, the steward replied back, what you have said is right. In other words, that's what should happen. But the one who is found to have it will be my slave. The rest of you will be blameless. It's a little bit odd. It doesn't happen as according to. According to your words is what you see in there. These two verses are totally different in application. The Joseph's brother stated that the thief should die, but Joseph's servant said that it should be according to your words, but the man who is found will be my slave. So he says it should be as you say it is, but it doesn't happen. There's an illustration there that he calls it the gem of the messianic wisdom, is these two verses establish a biblical worldview from which the story comes to us that slavery is equivalent to death. We shall swallow them alive like graves, the place of death, like those in good health who go into the pit. There's another reference he puts, note how Sheol, the place of death, is equated with a pit. The same word translated in Hebrew as prison, dungeon, ward, etc. Now, if somebody would like to look up, simply because I need a little bit of a breath and take a little drink, would somebody be willing to read Genesis 45, 25 through 8 aloud?
Fainted, for he believed them not. And they told him all the words of Joseph that he had said to them. And when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the Ruach of Yaakov, their Abba, revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.
Notice that twice it is stated that Joseph is alive. In Jacob's eyes, Joseph was dead. In other words, we have yet another thematic connection between Joseph's prison experience and the death. During Joseph's long stay in prison, he was dead for all intent and purposes in his father's eyes, and therefore he was truly resurrected in Jacob's eyes. So he draws a very thematic connection there. If you go to page 13, and that is very small print, I apologize, but that's because we only want to cover it. On page 13, let's look at the significance of the chiastic structure in Genesis 45, which would have been in today's portion that he talked about. So if you flip back to page, to see it, page 7 of your handout, you will see the chiastic structure of the portion, and he goes through it that Joseph was told to leave. This is basically starting at 45. Joseph was told to leave, they told the Egyptians to leave his room, and then at the end, in Joseph 45, Pharaoh told Joseph's brothers to leave Egypt. And then the B would be Joseph revealed his brothers. B1, Joseph's brothers were revealed to Pharaoh. Then C, Joseph wept. C1, Joseph wept. D, Joseph would ask about his father. Joseph was sent to his father, for that was D1. E, brothers couldn't believe it was Joseph. E1, Joseph tried to conceive them that he was Joseph. Tried to convince them he was Joseph. F, Joseph asked the brothers to come close. F1, Joseph requested that the father be brought close. G, I am Joseph your brother. G1, Joseph was the master over Pharaoh's household. H, Joseph said that his brothers sold him to Egypt. H1, Joseph said that the Holy One sent him there. I, Joseph was sent ahead to the provider for them. I1, Joseph was sent ahead for the great deliverance of his family, which brings us to J, which he calls the central axis of the theme of this chiastic structure. Genesis 45:6, which states, hold on. 45:6 states, and now don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. It isn't? Hold on. That's 45.
2 years of hunger have passed.
There you go.
5 more to go.
There you go. Sorry. For the famine has been in the land for 2 years. There will be 5 more years to go. That's actually what it says right there. It was word for word. I didn't realize that. So in Genesis 45, it says, for 2 years of hunger have passed, 5 more to go. This is a side note. This is just me paying attention to the last couple of weeks. We've listened to Eddie talk about, and what was the kind of the theme of his talk. And I think of him, I think he's mentioned about the 7,000-year plan. And what's interesting about that is it's almost a marker, is it not? We're at 2,000 years, and there's 5 more to go. How many does that equal? 7. Kind of interesting there. That was a side note that I mentioned about the 7,000 years. And I know I'm going to hop over on this, but I have to have a conversation with events that take place. I don't know how you guys are, but with myself, I've experienced that. I find it interesting as I see things happen in my life that lead me to places that I think is awesome. And an example I want to give is I had a conversation with an uncle of mine just not too long ago. And if he hears this, maybe he'll also respond to me. But one of the conversations we had was I was talking about the 7,000-year plan, and then I kind of was relating, and I was just kind of giving little excerpts from it. And keep in mind, he doesn't have quite the understanding. He still has, if I can refer to the Sunday church understanding, and I think you guys kind of hopefully will know what I mean. But he makes a comment, well, but the Lord can come anytime he wants. He isn't going to wait 7,000 years because it wouldn't seem right, because then people would then not be in a rush to do all the things you're supposed to do before he comes. So if you think that he's coming, and the purpose of what he was saying was, well, if he's going to come, 7,000 years, then why would anybody want to serve or do what they're supposed to do? And I got to reflecting on that, and I don't know if you guys have heard that before. If you've heard people say, well, he could come anytime, it wouldn't be after 7,000 years. But I thought to myself, or 6,000 years for his second coming, the second advent. And I thought to myself, how interesting is that the Lord brought in the remembrance of the scripture that talks about our hearts. And truly, if our hearts are in the right place, why would we wait, kind of like the lantern, the 10 virgins, why would we wait until closer to his coming to do everything that we're supposed to do? is that truly how a bride should or a bride to be should operate? You know? And I couldn't say that to him then at the moment, but I thought about it and reflected on it. And isn't that a heart condition? That if we truly are preparing for him, if we truly want to be his bride, we're not going to wait to the end. That's like saying, oh, and I hope I'm not inappropriate by saying this, but the minute I make a proposal to my wife, or vice versa, the bride to go out, well, I know I made a proposal, but I'm still going to date anybody I want to until the actual marriage happens. You get what I'm saying there? I thought to myself, how ironic is that? If our heart's in the right place, we're not going to have that attitude. Even though we know he may not be coming till a certain time down the road, we shouldn't have that. We should always have the heart of, we are in that proposal state. The minute we say yes to Yeshua, aren't we saying we're now proposed to him? There's a wedding coming. Why would we turn around and do something that we know he doesn't want us to do?
But wasn't your uncle really just revealing who he is?
His uncle revealing who he is, meaning...
No, I thought you said your uncle or someone had said something.
Well, he did. He was saying in regards to that he doesn't think that the God would give us the whole plan up front, because why would he tell us when he's coming at the end? Right. Because we would wait until the end to do everything, and that's a heart condition. But go ahead.
That's what he believes.
Yeah, that's what he believes.
He believes other people are that way too.
Yep.
And they're not. And it's clear they're not that way.
Exactly.
They can't see it.
I hear you. And that's the interesting thing, even talking more about that, is as you see the thematic, and I pointed this out this morning, as we started going through the Torah portions, I am amazed at, here we are, we started the new Torah portions 4 weeks ago, and I have uncovered, this is my fourth year of studying Torah, and I'm uncovering a lot, and it feels like I should be at the middle of a book by now, but we haven't even finished the book of Genesis. And this is like the 5th week. And the point of that, I guess, I'm just sharing in the revelation of all the things to come. And I know it's a hop away from, and I know we're probably not going to cover a lot. However, that's the reality of, I think, why it's important that we study these Torah portions. Why we didn't before, we had our reasons for not. We were blinded. And I think it's a prayer for all of those who aren't seeing a justification or reason to study the Torah portions, because, that's a Jewish thing. Even if it wasn't a Jewish thing, the amount of information that we get from them, do you know what I'm saying? So those, I pray that he sees, as well as others, that there are reasons why we study the Torah, why we focus on the Torah, that it is the beginning to the end and all that. And I got all that just from that one scripture. The 2 years of hunger have passed. We have 5 more to go. And in a conversation with an uncle, saying, why would he tell us the plan from the beginning? He can come anytime he wants to, which he's probably right. He could come anytime he wants to, but he didn't. He gave us a plan. He wants us to be that bride. He wants us to be in the state of a proposal. He wants us to follow that before he comes. And so it was just interesting. I know I got off on a tangent there, but that's okay. That's the whole point of study. Thank you for your input as well. But with that chiastic structure, I'm going to talk about the messianic, or with that chiastic structure, he points out, let me get back to it. The significance of the chiastic structure, if you look at back to page 13. In the first point, he points out that the chiastic the structure, you notice that the central axis was 2 years of famine and 5 more years to come. It says, interesting, that particular central axis, which seemed to be profound. Let's couple that with the information of 2 important things. Joseph as the bread man of life, and 2, the number 5 and grace. I don't know if you guys have studied the numbers, and regarding to the number 5 is referred to as grace. These three teachings present a picture of the Messiah. Even the hardest skeptic would have trouble not accepting, but let's go, he went over a couple of them. And I have time for one of the nuggets, and that is if I want to point back to a notation on page 9. It talks about Mathematics 101, and I want to read Genesis 41, 48 and 49. So Joseph stored up grain in such an abundance, like the sea of sand, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. I'm going to go back up to one of the things that we have to remember is during the 7 years of plenty, Egypt stored 1/5 of their grain so that they would have enough to survive during the 7 years of famine. If you saved 1/5 of your income over the next 7 years, what does that equal? Not enough. Do you think that, that your year's savings would sustain you through 7 years with a regular income? No. I don't think so. Yet we read that the Torah states that the grain Joseph stored during those years were like the sand of the sea, which they were actually told to save 1/5, which that number 5 deals with grace. And he makes that connection, and he points that out on page 9 to draw us to page, I know we're doing a lot of flipping. If you would look at page 15, the third point that he makes, reading Matthew 14, 13 through 21, Mark 6 through 31, Luke 9, 2 through 7, and also John 6, 1 through 14, he notes that there were 5 loaves of bread, 5,000 men, and Yeshua sits them up in groups of 50 and 100, which is 5 times 20. As you can see, there is a parallel that's obvious, almost exact, and purposeful. Just as Joseph graciously provided bread, so likewise Yeshua provided bread for this group of people. The number 5 is most predominant number in this story. Therefore, the messianic significance of 5 and the central axis of our chiastic structure in the Torah portion teaches us that Joseph is a picture of Yeshua who provides bread to the multitude, but of course there's obviously more. And if you look at page, we're going to flip to Messiah's work, and what I found to be interesting, and then we'll have to wrap it up. We're out of time. I'm looking for it. D, a special taxation on the people. Now, I want to recap here what we have done when we talk about the Messiah's work. Tony points out 2 advents, his first coming and his second. He's relating this Torah portion to the second advent, the things that are to come. And if you think about the things that are to come, and you hear that mention about the 1/5 that they stored in Egypt, he is comparing the second advent to this story as well. And the fact that if you read, I'm going to read the highlights of it. There is a parallel with the second advent. Pharaoh owns everything. The people are Pharaoh's servants. Joseph moved people to the cities. A special tax is placed on the people, and a special stipulation is given for the priests. Now, he is actually relating that to when he comes back in those 1,000 years. And it goes back to when that 1,000 years is done, he hands over to the king the kingdom, the city, just like he hands over to Pharaoh. And what I found interesting was the special taxation. I'm going to turn to Ezekiel. Actually, we won't have time. Turning to Ezekiel, if you have time, read Ezekiel 45 to 46. The emphasis on 45, 46 is offerings to the Holy One. Once again, we see that the taxation of 20% produced of the land is a picture of how one day we will all return to Adonai a portion of the blessing that we obtained from him. It's that taxation, and that we end up giving that 20%, that 1/5, back to him. In regards to, he gave us that 1/5, and the 1/5 that we gave, the abundance, etc. And I think that is a very interesting drawing to the end time. After the 1,000 years, Messiah hands over to the king, to God the Father, the city. And then we at that point will have 20% that we will give. As I conclude with that, the unfortunate part is there's so many things that we can draw from his work. There's even more that he gives at the end that we didn't even cover. In fact, I think we only covered 1/5 of what he actually has in this Torah portion. So as you have time, yes.
I think there's a correlation between also in Matthew, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish.
Yes.
And then if you remember, there's a huge abundance that then comes from that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this harvest must have been 5 times a normal harvest that we're talking about in all this as well.
Oh. Yeah, and referring to the 2 year, or the amount, yes.
Yeah. And then I see a lot of other corollaries there in Matthew as well, in Matthew and Mark. 5 loaves and 2 fish.
Yep, and he even does it in part C and B of page 15. He talks about the same thing, but we didn't cover that. Again, there's a lot of things we didn't cover simply because if we would cover it, then we would take into Marcel's time. And you know how Marcel is, where he's not even here. You know how Marcel is about cutting into his time. He always wants to reclaim his. So therefore, that being said, there is a lot there, and it's so much to unpack. That's why I said we're just basically covering some nuggets, some thoughts. That's kind of interesting. It goes back to, we could be studying this for the next 3 days, even just the book of Genesis, and unpacking the parallels and going back and forth and looking at, and it still goes back to, I remember a couple weeks ago hearing from somebody saying that we could study the Torah 70 years and still be learning, and so that being said, until next year, we revisit this portion. If we don't revisit it before then, let us end with a blessing after the Torah portion. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth, Yeshua the Messiah, and set everlasting life in the midst of our midst. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah. Amen.